Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our webinar. I'm Rebecca Town. I'm CEO at Vermont Electric Cooperative. And as I've connected with members over the last few months, the questions I hear most frequently are, what is going on with this zany weather? They don't always use the word zany, but that's the gist. And what is VEC doing to improve our reliability with all of these storms that keep creating outages? This past summer in Vermont, we experienced devastated flooding. In December, we had 4 storms creating significant outages 4 weeks in a row. And then in January, we had winter storms Finn and Jerry, which created multi-day outages. We have a couple experts today. I'm going to introduce them, and we'll ask Dr. Shafer and Peter to turn on your cameras and unmute yourselves when you're ready. And Peter and Jay are our resident experts on the topics of reliability and weather. And we are going to hear from them for about 30 minutes in presentation style. And then we are going to head into Q&A for the rest of the time. We have a lot of questions from the registration process. Thank you to those of you who already submitted questions. From the number of questions, I know we won't be able to get to all of them, but I also know that we have some great content and we'll get to a lot of them today. Also during this webinar, you can use the Q&A function to submit additional questions at any time, and we'll do our best to try to get to as many as we can. With that, let me introduce our speakers and we'll dive right into the topics and the content here. Peter Rossi is VEC's Chief Operating Officer. He has been leading operations with VEC for 7 years, after 10 years in operations at Powder River Electric Cooperative in Wyoming. He brings many years of experience in electrical engineering and technology, including 8 years of technology consulting for IBM. During significant outage events, Peter leads VEC's outage response in his role as incident commander. We also have Dr. Jay Shafer. Jay is the Chief Science Officer at Disaster Tech, where he leads product development and research for electric utilities. Jay is an award-winning weather forecaster, and his research led to the development of patented technology that helps understand the risks of extreme weather hazards to power systems. He's one of the authors of Vermont's Climate Action Plan, and using his technology and expertise is an advisor to us at VEC and other utilities as we prepare for severe weather and potential power outages. So with that, I will hand it over to you, Jay, to start with the weather piece.
Great. Just want to do a quick sound check. Can you hear me okay?
Sounds great.
Great. Okay, and just confirming that you could see my slides as well.
Not yet. Are you screen sharing?
Yes.
Cannot see slides.
Oh, stand by.
There we go.
Okay, thank you.
Good to roll.
All right, great. It's my pleasure to be here today, and having lived in 20 years in Vermont, working many storms, can certainly relate to a lot of the sentiment that people are wondering about. I've got about 10 slides I'm going to present today, and going to start with the climate aspect of how our climate is forcing extreme weather, and then focus on how we support VEC for storm services, and really coming back to our 2 windstorms in January we had as our highlighting our capabilities there. But first off, I want to start with the big picture. And if you look at temperatures over the Earth, that's the strongest signal with our changing climate, and all that excess energy that would be going back out to space if we had less greenhouse gases from a really high carbon economy it goes back into the oceans. So 90% of that extra energy goes back into the oceans, and the oceans are the largest governing body for regional weather, and how that expresses itself through precipitation events and other types of storm systems, as we'll talk about here. So the oceans are getting warmer, and that also means the air temperatures are warming as well over lands. And the oceans are the largest driver of this, but the planet is the warmest it's been at least since the last interglacial period, and that's tens of thousands of years. But the rate of warming, more alarmingly, is the greatest that it's been in over 3 to 4 million years, and that's as a result of our high carbon economy burning fossil fuels and carbon dioxide going into the atmosphere. And it's a slow and steady upward climb in temperatures. But let's try to look at this a little more locally this winter. And winters are always pretty highly variable in our corner of the world, but this winter was the warmest on record in the instrument record, which goes back about 130 years. And that warming is consistent over a large area to the upper Great Lakes and into the Northeast. And the top 5 or so warming events or winters happened in the last 10 years. So that's as we're climbing that really strong curve of warmer winters. What does this mean? Less reliable snow cover. We're going to have more intense rainfall events. So the storms that do happen with heavy rainfall tend to have more precipitation with them because the oceans are warmer. The oceans evaporate more water from them. If they evaporate more water, you get more precipitation. That's just the simple water cycle at play with us here. And then the other thing we're seeing in the wintertime is a really strong warm signal. So it doesn't mean we're getting drier in the winter. In fact, we're just getting more rain on snow events and more thawing events and less reliable cold winter periods. Now, if we look at this for what this means for weather on VEC's power system, and the y-axis here is showing level of impact by the different hazard of weather here, is that the fall storm season tends to be the most impactful for things like in the orange bar, windstorms, and in the blue for wet snowstorms. And then this one ice storm was the Christmas 2013 ice storm. And then during this 9-year period, winter was relatively quiet. And winter in northern Vermont can be quiet. Actually, cold, dry conditions and dry snowfall tends to have pretty good grid reliability. But this past January, however, we had Winter Storm Finn and Jerry, and these were outlier events. And going back at least to 1980, we can't find any sort of parallel storm signature to that. One of the other really strong signals we're seeing with climate change is that this seasonal expansion of the early winter storm season is moving more into winter time itself. So think about the risk increasing just because the season of vulnerability is broadening from a warmer winter period. And where are we going? Well, it's only going to get warmer from here. And then in Vermont, the mean average temperatures are warming about 1 degree Fahrenheit per decade. And that's just historic over the last 50 years. And this is projected to increase based off of low emissions and high emissions scenarios. We're most likely still tracking on the high emissions scenarios. Low emissions is if we were to mitigate or reduce our carbon economy. This is also a big effort with electrification. And if we could produce more electricity from low carbon solutions, then we could lower the rate of warming and greenhouse gases that are already in our atmosphere. And that's a really strong and big initiative that we're all making investments in, but it just takes a lot of time. So people always ask me, what does this mean for the future? And I always like to say that if you looked at the last 10 years are really the best indicator for the next 10 years because that trend and that persistence tells you a lot about the future. So wintertime is going to continue to be less reliable and more backward springs, fall starts to winters, and the summer season is probably not going to warm as fast in our climate zone here. We have the governing water bodies like the Great Lakes and the oceans do help to govern the temperatures from being as warm because of the humidity that's in the air as well. So what does this mean if we break it down by each hazard? And there's a lot of things going on with this diagram, so let me just walk through this with you. The y-axis is a level of confidence we have in the projection of these different hazards through the next 30 or so years. And then the x-axis is describing if it's going to increase or decrease. And then to the left of this dashed line, we see that extreme cold and snowfall will eventually get to a place where the climate is just too warm to support more snowfall. And we see that now in the southern zone of rain snow lines within storm systems and by elevation this past winter season. To the right of the line, we notice that we see where our higher confidence, higher impact changes might happen. So the growing season getting longer, more extreme heat events, heavier precipitation events, pretty high confidence increasing highly here. For the power outages in the grid, we're concerned about wet snow, wind, and ice. And this was a report published about 3 years ago. We projected then that wet snow storms would increase in coverage or increase their impacts with the highest degree of confidence. Ice storms and thunderstorms are phenomena that are relatively rare, and there's a lot of other competing factors that make them being less confident to increase. So ice storms, the good news about that, and thunderstorms right now, it doesn't look like the increase in damage potential is increasing with climate change. If they do happen, they can be more severe, but the frequency is not increasing with those. And then drought, we get seasonal drought here into late summertime, into early fall. That signal has been presenting itself and will continue to present itself, even though we're getting heavier precipitation events. The precipitation is not as evenly distributed over the course of a whole year. It's more distributed to a fewer portion of extreme events. Okay, so if we look at Winter Storm Finn, this was the first of the 2 January windstorms we had. The top right product is showing a map of a prediction about 4 days ahead of this storm. So we work with Peter Rossi and others at VEC to help inform them well ahead of the storm so that they can staff appropriately, call in mutual aid to restore power faster after the storm hits. And we detected this storm pretty strongly about 4 days prior. So you can see there's a lot of red across northern Vermont, red's over 55 miles an hour at this time. And then we have lots of other rich analytics and products that we provide that simplify the information in a way that just makes it very easy to act upon. So we see that 4 days prior, 90% of their forecast system was at 45 miles an hour or greater risk. And then peak winds around 61 miles an hour for that scenario. We provide 5 scenarios to help plan off of. And this is a really strong signal that was consistent leading up to the storm as well. So this is a pretty well detected, well forecast event. Now it's always hard to predict how much damage you're going to have from storms, and that's part of our research. But there's a lot of known knowledge and known information that's embedded within our side and VEC side to take this information and translate it to a storm plan. We put these 2 storms together. This is Winter Storm Finn and Jerry. This is the observed winds now and the actual impact. These little circles you see here are locations that there were outages. And this purple area, these 2 purple areas had winds that were around or exceeding close to 80 miles an hour in downsloping wind regions in parts of eastern Chittenden County, and then also to the east of Newport in the Holland area as well. And one thing you notice is that the higher winds clearly correlate pretty well with where there was greater damage, and that's pretty intuitive. And because kinetic energy of wind is the velocity squared, so strong changes or little changes in the wind speed can increase the damage potential. So we had highlighted these areas as pretty big risk zones 2 to 3 days ahead of the storm. And because of the way that their system is spread out east to west, the way you plan for this, you may have crews that are staged both to the east and west of the service territory to help restore power faster if you know a storm looks like this. Okay, so southeast winds, that was a southeast windstorm. It turns out southeast winds are some of the known greatest risks to the VEC system because of the vulnerabilities of the terrain and the downsloping wind regions that can occur. This is what was Tropical Storm Philippe that combined into a larger storm system in late October 2017. What you'll see is the winds are weaker for this storm, but the impacts were higher because there was a lot of precipitation and it was earlier in the storm season as well, and the temperatures were warmer. We had Winter Storm Elliott just a little over a year ago, also known as the Grinch storm. And we see again that red zone in the western areas of the district, downsloping wind regions in some of those areas to the east of Newport as well. And then we had Winter Storm Finn, which we just described, and its brother Jerry. And Finn and Jerry were remarkably similar in their overall footprint. Jerry had a little bit stronger winds in the eastern part of the service territory as well. So what we do is we develop after the storm also hits to learn from them. We'll have this information that's provided and becomes a Bible or a reference point and goes into memorialized and documentation for planning and training for future events as well. And then lastly, my last slide here, sorry, 2 more slides. This was actually, if you look at how exceptional the winds were during these storms over the whole storm season over the Northeast, everywhere you see in these little red shaded areas where winds exceeded hurricane force, wind gusts, not sustained winds. But you could see that VEC was in the hot zone or the heat zone here. Not a lot of areas had winds actually exceeded hurricane force. Some of the downsloping wind regions of the White Mountains, coastal Maine, and then downwind of some of the Great Lakes as well. So it was pretty exceptional, those two windstorms. So, well, this is just on the more on the research innovation side, but what we're doing is taking all of the storm history, cross-correlating that with outage performance, looking at things like vegetation maintenance and the age of assets to help inform the mitigation plans, adaptation plans, and resiliency hardening investments that Peter Rossi and his team are leading at, at VEC. So this heat map shows of these 5 events, we had 3 wet snowstorms and those 2 windstorms, how many places in each one of these areas had some exceedance of moderate to high threshold. So there are some places that had 5 storm events, but you notice that there's a pretty wide varying variability here in Grand Isle County. Actually had no storm events as well. So the terrain in Vermont is complex and does make these storms harder, but the technology is there to prepare for them better. And at this point, I want to turn it over to Peter Rossi to describe what he and his team are doing there to take some of this information for their resiliency investments and whatnot. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Jay. I will. Okay, perfect. I'm just going to start my slideshow. And so, yeah, as Jay said, we've been actually working very closely together for the last 7 years, and these models continuously get better with every event. And not only does Jay's information as it's coming ahead of a storm really help with storm planning and activities surrounding recovery from such an event, but it also feeds into how we do some asset planning and to ruggedize our system so we can prevent outages, which is the ultimate plan of attack when we're looking at resiliency and reliability. One thing that I would like to just start out with is you hear these terms out there a lot. What is the difference between reliability and resiliency? And there is certainly an intersection, which is this little graphic that we're trying to show here. But reliability really looks at the consistency and dependability of delivering power on a day-to-day basis. So we want to make sure that you have your power when you want it to charge your vehicles, to work from home, those sorts of things. And so there's certain tasks that we do on a constant basis to make sure that power is as reliable as we can make it here in northern Vermont. Resiliency really talks about the investments, the large capital dollars that we invest into our system to not only do what we call storm hardening or preventing outages during major events, especially the ones that Jay was talking about, but also how do we recover quickly from those events? We know that they're going to come. We know that they're going to be stronger. And so how do we invest in our system, in our personnel, in our vehicles, and also the location of those lines to make sure that we can access them quicker and restore power faster? And so, how are we doing as far as reliability is concerned? And of course, we can look at statistics and measure ourselves against other co-ops. This does not stop what we are doing. I think we are doing a very good job, but we constantly need to improve to drive down these numbers as low as they can go, because quite frankly, people don't want to have their power off. And as a member, I don't want to have my power off. So we want to look at this, but I want to give some confidence to the membership that we are really striving and reaching some really good goals. So the top line on this graph shows what the Vermont Public Utility Commission sets as our goal for what's called the System Average Interruption Duration Index. And that's a really long word and a very standard statistic that takes all of the number of minutes of outages that we've had and divides it by the number of meters on our system. So this is a very global look at VEC. Different circuits perform differently. As Jay pointed out, there's areas that are affected by winds much more of the time during these storms than, say, maybe the Grand Isle in this last event. But if you look at our statistics compared to the goal that the Public Utility Commission sets forth, and also the median SAIDI numbers from all other cooperatives across the United States, we are doing fairly well. I certainly understand that saying that we're doing well to somebody that has had a 5-day outage because we've experienced high winds is not all that comforting, but we are looking at these types of statistics to make sure that we can drive those minutes that you're out per year on average down as low as they can be. And so, what causes reliability issues? And these two charts, while they look similar, have a little bit different of an impact. So the chart on the left, the customer hours out by cause, is how long, because of a certain thing, is somebody out. So for example, the biggest cause of or cause for the length of outages are trees. And that's because trees end up growing in forests in our right of ways, and it takes a long time to get there. It takes a long time to clear the trees. And so outages tend to be longer due to due to trees. But there's also other things like animals, weather. In this case, we don't have any operator errors, but power supplier. Those all affect the length of time that these outages are out. And on the right-hand side is what causes those outages. So the quantity of outages for a specific cause is on the right-hand side, and you can see that the company initiated outages, which means we take an outage so that our line workers can work on the line safely and de-energized, is the vast majority of the number of outages that are caused, but they're not as long. So that's just a comparison between the two to kind of show you some of the statistics that we look at so that we can start driving down outages overall. So what are we doing to improve reliability? This is really where it's all about maintenance, some infrastructure investment. We're looking at our system design. So let me just give you a quick example. Our systems, sort of like the picture in the left-hand corner, are very radial in nature. That's very typical of a rural electric co-op. And so what that means is kind of like a spoke, or a hub, being your substation, and the spokes of a bicycle wheel going out. If there's a break in any one of those areas on that spoke, that entire spoke is out, or that circuit. And so we look at ways of redesigning our system to avoid that from happening, but that it's just the nature of the way our system is designed. But what we can do is maintenance. And it's just like your car. We want to do oil changes. We want to make sure the tire rotations are happening. And so we spend a lot of time on maintenance. We also have a 24/7, 365 day a year control center. We have one in Newport and one in Johnson. So we're constantly monitoring our system and responding accordingly. And so the examples that are shown here are how we leverage technology to do our maintenance. The pictures in the upper right-hand corner are from our infrared inspections. Through infrared, we can see if a particular part is either wearing or not connected properly, and we can replace it before an outage happens. In the bottom two pictures, we are in the process of utilizing drones to do a pole-to-pole inspection on all of the different issues that could be out there. And the picture on the right-hand side shows that while we still have electricity flowing through this wire, you can see that an outage could be imminent. So we're able to either reroute power or fix this issue energized before it becomes an outage. So that's how we're also leveraging technology. So what are we doing to increase resiliency? Well, resiliency, as I mentioned before, really focuses on capital investment with lots of money in order to make sure that the system is resilient. One of the things that a not-for-profit cooperative can utilize is after an event, such as the one that Dr. Jay Shafer was talking about, and it's declared a FEMA level event, we can get additional funds from FEMA, not only to cover the cost, or at least 75% of the cost of actually responding to the event, but also additional monies to put into our system so that they don't become a problem or continue to be a problem in the future. And a good example of this is we've applied for approximately $6.1 million over 16 projects between 2017 and 2022. And I'm going to give you an example of the outcome of one of those projects and what it means to resiliency here in a second. The other thing is we invest heavily in technology. There's a lot of ways to bring data back from the system in order to do asset management and invest in places that need additional work. And we also spend a lot of time and effort training employees on how to do enhanced emergency response. Not only our line workers that are out there putting the system back together, but the organization behind the scenes of ensuring we have the data necessary to apply for FEMA funds so that we are able to get additional funds to invest back into the system, but also because we manage a lot of mutual aid crews, interfaces with other organizations, and those kind of things that need those constant trainings. One aspect of investment is the graphics that I show you at the bottom of the screen. If we didn't have the tie switch in the lower left-hand corner, you can see that a power outage in one of the generations, one of the generators at the top of that this area right here, flowing through substation 1, if there was a power outage here, we would have no power to this house. But if we put in tie switches or tie lines to other substations and circuits that can handle that additional load, if there was a generation issue here, it would flow around back to that house through that tie switch. So that's just one area or one technology that we can leverage to improve resiliency. So this is the example I wanted to spend a few minutes on, just to kind of show what we invest in when we receive funds from FEMA. So this is at our West Charleston substation. That's the number 48, and it's on one of our main circuits, which is the 1A circuit that comes out of our West Charleston substation. This particular project crosses the towns of Charleston, Derby, Holland, and Morgan. And it was from the October 2017 event, which was that first event that Jay had talked about in comparison, which was Storm Philippe. It was about a $400,000 ask from FEMA, and we received about 75%. This project was finished in 2018. And it involved several, I don't want to call them phases, but parts of the actual project, because the line is quite long and sort of complicated. So we added reclosers and fuses, which are sectionalizing devices, so that these other circuits that go off the main line don't actually roll back and affect the main line. We replaced the smaller wire that was on about 1.1 miles of this with larger wire, and we made it covered because it went through some trees, so that prevents, say, a branch from hitting the line and knocking it out, so it prevents that. We added two spans as a tie line, and we also retired a bunch of line that we didn't need. And so if you look at the outage data between 2012 and 2018, and then similarly, after we completed the project, 2018 to 2024, we have, and this includes all of those major storms that Jay talked about, we reduced the number of outages by 39%, but more importantly, we reduced the outage time that those outages created by 94%. So we've talked about it, and I'm sure it's going to come up in the questions, why don't we just underground all of our line and those kind of things. But I think there's a lot of other options and potentially less expensive that we can invest and show large reductions in outages and improvements in our overall service to our membership. Rebecca, that's what I have for now, and I will stop sharing.
All right, great. Well, thank you, Jay. Thank you, Peter. Great presentations that head us right into a bunch of really relevant questions that we've already heard from attendees. So I'm going to go through a bunch of those with you. And Jay, if you want to turn your camera back on, I'm going to sort of ping pong between Jay and Peter. And also, if you two both have answers to a question, then that's even better. So let me start with a question that came in through the Q&A while you were talking, Jay. One of the things that you mentioned was the term reverse spring, and that we're going to see a lot of reverse springs. Could you share a little bit more about what that is and what that means?
Reverse spring, also known as backward spring. So spring weather it's pretty normal for it to be variable here, but climate forcing is forcing spring to come a little bit earlier. It doesn't mean that spring is always going to be reversed. It just means the variability of temperature and weather within spring is actually increasing with climate change. So don't expect when spring arrives early for it to stick around. We're still going to go backwards and have cold weather or snowstorms in April, even though the climate's warming, essentially.
Gotcha. So more maybe like ping pong spring.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Yeah.
All right, great. Thanks. All right, Peter, a question for you specific to the presentation, which is around the outage causes and whether we've seen if that's shifted over time, if those causes that you've shown, if you've seen it trending one way or the other in terms of the primary causes of outages.
It has, and so to answer the question simply, yes. But more specifically, one of the areas that we're really focused on is not actually there's two areas. One is animal-related outages, and so these would be from squirrels, birds, those kind of things. Those have gone down significantly because we have a concerted effort. We call it bird booting. That's kind of the slang term that we use here. But really what it's doing is covering the transformers, covering the bushings, making sure that birds can't stick their beaks in between these covers to get little grubs that might be in there. And then those cause outages. So those have actually trended downwards. Trees have unfortunately stayed about the same. And it's not because we don't have a robust vegetation management system. We spend about $4 million a year on tree clearing, and we have a great team behind that. But we can only do so much. We only have a 50-foot right-of-way. Trees keep falling into our line from outside the right-of-way, so that's a little bit of a challenge there. And then on the last thing is company-initiated outage, depending on the year. So either trends up or trends down, depending on the type of work that we have to either do energized or de-energized due to the type of areas that we're working on.
All right, great. Thanks, Peter. All right, question back to you, Jay. You said that extreme weather is increasing, but what about the predictability? So you spend a lot of time, we rely on you for that predictability. Is predictability increasing with advances in weather forecasting, or is it just more difficult to forecast? Talk about the predictability piece a little bit.
Yeah, that's a thing I get very commonly is that, oh yeah, it's the sky is falling, extreme weather is getting more extreme. We don't know when it's going to come or happen. And that's mostly a myth. It depends on the phenomena we're trying to predict. Some things are always going to be hard to predict, like the prediction of a tornado. We really can't predict that more than tens of minutes ahead after it forms on the ground and our radar detects it to actually know and predict it accurately. Like that's not going to change with big leapfrogs in technology. So prediction's actually improving, and those investments are happening slowly and incrementally as our observing systems get better, as the science gets better. So generally, we're tracking at or we're improving in our prediction. Extreme events are always going to be hard for people to work and understand because they're outlier events. So I think how we plan for and respond to those events, we could be smarter with that, understanding what's within the realm of the possible, because human memory is not really a good record. And oftentimes those people in their career won't work a severe storm that could be a black swan event either. So I think that's where that perception comes from.
Great, thanks. All right, Peter, to you. You sort of foreshadowed this a little bit around the undergrounding. So one of the questions that came in is someone was interested in the cost and reliability comparisons of underground versus above ground power lines, and are there plans to bury power lines underground?
So let me take this kind of a multi-part question, and I do have answers for all of them. So the first is cost. So I anticipated this question, so I had our team really go back over the last 5 years and kind of look at average trends and costs, and it up to about 2021, the cost of undergrounding a mile of line, generally speaking, and overhead the gap was closing very significantly. Prices really spiked in 21, 22, and even in 23 for conduit, which kind of has separated this. So to give everyone a perspective, a mile of underground line on average, this is, running the conduit, pulling in the wire, attaching it on both ends, is about $260,000. This is single phase, not three phase. This is just like a single phase line. To do a new overhead line, it's about $185,000. And then to reconductor in place with stronger wire, maybe bigger wire to handle electrification, it's about $85,000 for that same mile. So you can see that the installation is a large upfront capital investment. It is true that we also lower costs over time with reduced vegetation management, reduced property taxes, reduced outages. But when outages do happen, they will take between 3 and 10 times as long to fix, especially in the middle of winter. Maybe the ground is frozen, to dig that up and splice the wire back together. So the question is, do we have plans? Yes, we actually analyze every project for underground versus overhead, return on investment costs, and we call it strategic undergrounding in those areas that either request that we go underground, or B, because of some of the other analyses and data that we have, we want to make that investment in order to prevent overhead outages in the future. So a lot goes into this analysis, and we try to do everything by data. I think Jay said it right. We don't want to have our own opinions about it. We really want it to be based on outages and other investment focuses.
Great, thanks. All right, I've got the next two questions for first for Jay, then for Peter, are really about sort of the member perspective, because folks are watching this, they're interested in what this means for the utility infrastructure, but also I'm sure thinking, well, what does this mean for me in terms of my home or business and what that's going to look like? So the question for you, Jay, is as a VEC member, what's the best way to get information or about potential storms for personal preparedness?
So the National Weather Service is the authoritative source for just most use cases for weather information, but the National Weather Service does not provide clear power outage predictions. They'll generally put wording in there, and then the public media sources that provide that, such as your local TV meteorologist, will also communicate that information. So I would just say stick with your consistent, reliable, trusted sources of weather information. There's a lot of them out there. And then in extreme storms, also look to VEC. There was some communication now ahead of the storm. Now it's hard for everyone in the public to be ready for the type of forecast variability and forecast information that's out there and the complexity of that. So that's why a lot of that is not always communicated to members, because it's a little bit of too much information and it can be confusing. It always just be ready. Like, I think we all live here in Vermont, and weather does happen. It's good to have a plan for being without power for several days. And if you're not able to if you're able to help others, also check in on your neighbors and your community as well, because we're all here to try to help each other out.
Great, thanks. All right, well, you teed up perfectly Peter's piece of the question, which is one of the questions, what's the least expensive way to get through multi-day outages? What are alternatives for personal residential backup power, like generators or batteries? What's VEC doing for battery storage incentives? So sort of a bunch of questions that all I think are related.
So let me address batteries. VEC's strategy is to support batteries. They are the cleanest way to bring backup power, and it's a win-win situation between the member and VEC. So when paired with solar, when paired with maybe other renewable generation, it's great. From that perspective, and then also from a peak reduction standpoint, we incentivize members to kind of join our team. And when you're not using the battery, we use it for peak reduction, and then we incentivize you and give you a bill credit for that incentive. So it really is a win-win situation. But frankly, batteries are expensive, and they can't be afforded by everybody in the territory. So when we talk about the least cost, because that was part of the question, Rebecca, the least cost is wood stove if it's in the winter, which a lot of Vermonters have, or a backup generator, unfortunately carbon based. But if used infrequently, it's not going to have that big of an impact. We would love to see the cost of batteries come down, and then it's always there, it's always on, it's automatic, it's very easy, people don't have to worry about it. That's the direction that we're supporting. The market just has to catch up a little bit, and then we'll be there. And then honestly, a multi-day event, we don't like it either. I don't get a lot of sleep. I don't see my family. We're around the clock here at VEC trying to get the power back on. So a little tongue in cheek, a little bit of Vermont grit in there to kind of get through it together as a community.
Great, thanks. Okay, Jay, you shared a bunch about some recent storms that we've seen over time. And of course, in hindsight, with those great maps you showed, it's always easy to be like, here's how it played out. But your job is to follow the changing, shifting forecast, and not all some storms are easier to forecast than others. What storm during this last storm season was the most challenging to forecast, and why?
So I think the type of weather event that's always going to be the hardest is wet snow and ice, because 1 or 2 degrees right around freezing of difference can be the difference between a wet snow, a dry snow, can be the difference between freezing rain and just plain rain. And in particular, it's always the early season events that tend to catch all of us off guard. The November 27th, 28th wet snowstorm was the event that everyone in the meteorological community, all the weather forecast models did not see this possibility. It was like a 5% probability, and we don't act on a 5% probability because you would overplan all the time and overreact if you did that. So that was clearly the storm that I woke up in the middle of the night. I knew exactly what was happening. Message, it only had like a 3 to 6 hour lead time, and I felt terrible trying to get the forecast right 2 days prior is where we like to be for our sweet spot. And that was a rough one, but it only got better through the winter as the storm season went on. We all tend to get smarter and better with predictions in both just and the response.
Yeah, great. Yes, we too remember that Sunday after on the Thanksgiving weekend holiday and jumping very quickly into action, which our team did. They were great, but just sort of how all surprised, particularly after eating so much turkey and so much relaxation, to have to jump into storm response mode was jarring, let's say. All right, so you talked a bit about sort of data, and Peter, I want to ask you a question about data too, around the role of advanced monitoring and control systems, data analytics in terms of not just weather, but other ways that might feed into enhancing reliability.
Reliability or resiliency?
Either.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's good, because I like to separate the two, even though they intersect. And so I was just trying to gain some clarity on that. So when it comes to reliability, as I said, we have these 2 control centers that have well-trained control system operators that are monitoring everything from renewable generation, distributed generation, our normal generation, intersections to ISO New England, intersections to Hydro-Quebec, and we're able to switch very quickly. So, for example, in our Northeast Kingdom, if we have a car pole accident on one of our transmission lines, or we have an outage on the United States side of one of our transmission lines, we can switch within 5 minutes to an alternate source of power, keep your reliability on, and then make repairs to those transmission lines. So from a monitoring and control, that improves reliability tremendously. And we have a lot of these automatic switches across our territory that we can switch around, and we still invest in those types of technologies. As far as monitoring is concerned, we also have things on our system called fault finders. And so these are little devices that if there's a fault on our system, will sort of direct the line crews to the area that we need to fix. So it kind of speeds up the time that outages happen. And then finally, from a technology standpoint, one of the things that we're doing out in the islands as a pilot is there is a new type of device that can be installed on the secondary side. And what that means is the low voltage side of the transformer, but it can really monitor our system down to a very low level on a very a quick basis. Basically once every minute it will send a signal, and these devices work in tangent with each other, and they will actually pinpoint. One of the things that they give us is they will pinpoint where an outage is occurring. So like the distance between these devices and right on the location on a map, so that we are responding almost before the first phone call comes in. So that's part of the technology and the monitoring, everything that we do on a constant basis.
Great. Okay, a couple more questions that came in through the chat here. One of them is from our fellow co-op, Washington Electric Co-op, who is for you, Peter. We constantly discuss hardening of lines. Do we ever, quote unquote, soften lines, meaning we have an expendable device or a way that something that breaks under the strain that is designed to break and spares damage to the line or the poles, versus hardening, which is designed to prevent damage in the first place? Is that a strategy at all?
Yes, and it's called, I call it, if I'm reading the question right, I call it sectionalizing. So as I explained really briefly, you have this bicycle wheel with a bunch of spokes, and at the center of that is a hub, which is your substation. Really how our circuits are developed is you have that main spoke, and then you have several spokes that go off. And you can do one of two things. You can either tie it together, which is, with a solid blade, which basically means that the outage would roll all the way back to the substation, or you can install a fuse. And a fuse is just like the fuses in our homes way back in the 60s. You had the fuse panel, or in your car, it's just on a bigger scale, and it's supposed to sacrifice itself to basically keep only those small number of people out, but keep the main, the more main line on it, prevent it from rolling back. We also have things that are called reclosers, and these are sort of like circuit breakers in your house, which they're called reclosers because they actually reclose. So they try to clear the fault, and after a second or two, they close back in, which means they re-energize. And they'll do this a couple of times based on some engineering calculations. And if they can't clear the fault, then they'll open up. But that's also another device, not so self-sacrificing necessarily, but it definitely controls these outages. We can also control those remotely, from our control center. And there's other devices out there that act in a similar manner, but I believe that sectionalizing and preventing like a smaller outage from becoming a bigger one is part of this technology, or part of this strategy.
Yep, great. Okay, wanted to ask a little bit about, because VEC, we serve Northern Vermont, but we've, compared to a lot of other utilities, we're not that big, and we operate in a big ecosystem of a lot of other utilities. And so I wanted to ask about, first you, Jay, and then you, Peter, about collaboration with other utilities or other groups around this idea of resiliency and reliability, and what that collaboration looks like for you and your organization. Jay, why don't you go first?
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So, speaking to the future here, Rebecca, in our organization and how we're thinking about this.
Yeah,
and
and how you're collaborating with other utilities outside of VEC.
Yeah. Well, I think everyone wants to know how much worse is it going to be in the future in terms of frequency, intensity of extreme weather with climate change. And what I've found is it's a hard question to answer because we can't quite model extreme storms explicitly in a lot of climate change scenarios, but we could tease out all the different factors. So there's a lot of regional components to this based on the hazard. So the area that we're working on is more in long-term planning, and to help understand some of these high water marks for where some of these black swan or extreme storm events could be for planning, and educating people. Most of what we do and what I find doing is just educating the right people at the right time within the storm planning operations at a utility company, and helping them understand what's within the realm of the possible. Another area of focus is on hardening. in trying to quantify the return on investment. If you're going to have 10 more storms here, and it's going to cost X amount of money, you can actually do some math to do a cost benefit, and it's based off of the weather and climate forcing component of that. So just trying to get smarter, and there's a lot of use cases there, but those are the big ones that we're focused on.
Okay, great. Peter?
Yeah, I equate it to Team Vermont, and I have used that term a few times on the Velco operating committee. So just for members out there, because there is some confusion between VEC and Velco sometimes. Velco is our transmission company for the entire state of Vermont, and all the distribution utilities have an ownership in that organization. One of the subcommittees, or one of the committees to the board that is of that governs Velco, is the operating committee, and this is where a lot of operations people sit. I mean, there's other individuals that come in. Obviously, we have Jay and other vendors that come in and talk about how we can improve reliability and resiliency, and there's a lot of work that's done on that Vermont level. So a lot of interaction. We answer questions for each other. We want to find out what other co-ops are doing. We collaborate with our public utility commission to try to make things as consistent as possible, even though we're different entities. So there's a lot of collaboration there, both from an operational standpoint. We review events after they hit the entire state, say like Storm Elliott or Storm Philippe or those kind of things. We review, hey, what worked well for you, what didn't work well for you. I would also say that my colleague Sorel Bruner, who had done the previous webinar, he does a lot of collaborations with the University of Vermont and brings a lot of different technology and forward thinking ideas back to VEC. And I mean, we're talking with Dr. Jay Shafer, used to work for the Northern Vermont University system, and that's how we met. So we really like to use people that are in Vermont, experts about Vermont, but also we don't try to go at it alone. We try to coordinate with a bunch of different people. So
Great. All right. Well, we are going to bring it right back to the individual, because at the end of the day, we're a community of individuals thinking about the safety focus of this. And the question, and I'll ask you to answer, Jay, and then you, Peter, is how should individuals be prepared ahead of a potential storm event?
I think if you are capable and able to have your own resources and blessed to have your home and a backup energy source, it's best to just understand people who are around you that might be more vulnerable populations, to support them. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when storms are going to hit us again. And I think having a little patience with all of us here is really important for this. And take warning seriously. There's a lot of times where we get false positives and storms may not happen, but wouldn't you be a little more prepared and have something not happen at all than to not be prepared at all? And food, water, and the things that you start to become inconvenient around having 5-gallon buckets around, so you can have some base form of sanitation. You don't think about that reality every day. I know that, but working in disaster management, planning for the worst, expect the best, I think is a good motto there. And we have to hold our breath a little bit as well, that we are able to dodge the bullets and we're able to upgrade the systems fast enough ahead of these climate pressures.
I'm kind of smiling at this one because I live in a constant state of preparation all the time, both personally and professionally. And sometimes I come across as a pessimist because I'm always preparing for the worst, Jay, honestly. But I'm also an ex-first responder. I was a firefighter for 10 years. And so to answer this question is exactly how Jay ended it. At the end of the day, it's going to come down to having enough water. So if an event is coming through, we always fill up our bathtub. You can always boil the water. We happen to live next to a creek, so we could use that. We're always looking for ways that if our generator didn't work, we've bought ice, and if it's in the winter, we kept it outside and then stuck it in trays inside the refrigerator, which is going to keep that food colder longer. Having a gas-powered grill or even a coal-powered grill works well in order to cook food. So yeah, everything that Jay basically said is don't wait to the last minute when everybody's out there trying to purchase things. Think about it ahead of time. And I might even speak with our communications team. I've created a list for internal employees to kind of go down. It's a list that I've used since my firefighting days that might be beneficial for our membership, and we could share that out.
Great. Some great tips, both of you. Okay, well, this was fantastic. Thank you, Jay. Thank you, Peter. I always just enjoy, even though I spend a lot of time in this area, I still always learn something new from your expertise, and I'm sure a lot of folks on the webinar did too. For those of you who we weren't able to get to your question, thank you. We'll try to figure out a way, if we know who you are, to be able to respond to that in some way, shape, or form. And we just appreciate the engagement and participation. So much thanks to both of you and everyone who participated, and have a great rest of your day.